and welcome back. Great sessions this morning. So thanks to all the presenters. Great Q&A piece with Mary Means at lunch over the lunch hour today. So thanks for all of you who joined us for that session. We're going to kick off the afternoon session. First of all, I just want to say it's great to see everyone again, even via camera. Some of you I have been seeing in person lately, but we're excited to move through the year and hopefully start moving through the year with more face-to-face interaction and in-person work. So thanks for joining us again today. I do want to kick off this afternoon session with a couple of comments. First of all, this afternoon's speakers, if you have questions just like we had this morning, just post your questions to the chat space. I will be happy to relay those to the speakers at the end of the session. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. He also has some online polls, surveys that he's going to ask the audience to participate in. So when we get to that, I will post the link in the chat space as well. It's my honor to introduce Eric Renz-Whitmore, who's an Albuquerque-based community builder and ecosystem developer who's helped entrepreneurs and creatives build new opportunities, create new opportunities to build more equitable and sustainable entrepreneurial systems. His work includes roles in supporting community building efforts with media production at the University of New Mexico Arts Lab, with the technology community, with the New Mexico Technology Council, and the entrepreneurial community with the City of Albuquerque Economic Development Department. For those of you who joined us at the National Main Street Center Conference in Kansas City a couple of years ago, you might remember the outsized role that the Kauffman Foundation had in building communities and supporting Main Street work as well. And Eric was a ESHIP champion for the Kauffman Foundation and director of the ESHIP communities for the Forward Cities Initiative. And Eric's title today is Your Community Journey: Building the Path to Take You and Your District to Success. So away we go. Eric, I will hand it off to you.
Awesome. That's a great, really appreciate the introduction. It's just been, I'll say that I'm inspired to be, part of this group here today. I'm going to try and start sharing. We will see. That's always fun. So let's see if this works. Let's see. All right. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Are we seeing kind of just the image from the Main Street Conference?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So thanks and welcome back. Let's see. I'm Eric Renz-Whitmore. I use. I jumped at. Oh, I think I'm doing it the wrong way. So let me bring this back. Sorry about that. So I use he, him pronouns, and I've been working around economic development, community building, and what we call ecosystem building for about 15 years. And today I'll be sharing some stories, some lessons learned, and a few tools that I hope will help. And I think it builds on a lot of the themes that we've already heard from our previous speakers. So, before we get into all that, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to try this Menti tool. And Eduardo, if you haven't already, if you can put that in chat, we're going to use menti.com. There's a code. There's also a link that we'll have available. Let me, let's see.
The link is in the chat space.
Excellent.
Now. And if the link doesn't work, just go to menti.com and enter the code.
Excellent. All right, so we're sharing, let's see, we're sharing another one of these screens. And basically what I'm curious today is community is it's a buzzword, just like innovation and a few other things. And it's kind of where I've spent much of my adult career. So I'm curious, when you think about your district, your Main Street program, neighborhood, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is that you're focused your work on, I'm wondering if folks can kind of characterize where you're at in that community journey. Do you say, we don't have a community, we're starting from scratch? Maybe you're telling people you have a community. I know I've done this. You tell people that you've got a community, but you're not really totally sure. Then there's folks who are kind of on that journey of growing that community there. And then there's folks who, my community rocks. So I'll ask you to go ahead and respond to this. Um, looks like we are getting some, let's see, looks like we're getting some responses. And it's not letting me. All right. All right. Oh, nice. Okay. Well, this is fantastic. And you see, I don't know, I love Menti. I love these little tools that we can use to help get a good sense of, who's in the room and different questions like that. All right. So you've got a lot of folks who've got their community rocks. I appreciate the honesty from the folks who say that they've got community, but they're not necessarily yet sure. And like most of us, we're growing community. And sometimes, community has a lot of different facets. Sometimes you're bringing new folks in to what might be considered community. So this is all good to know. And now, just so I have a better sense of who's in the room and why people are here, why you took the job that you've taken, the role you've taken, can you just share sort of maybe a brief sentence, couple words? Why is it that you do your work? Is it, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but do you feel called to do this? Was it just a job? What is it that actually got you involved in this? And I'll wait for a couple of seconds. I know this is a less easy question. So, and I'll also say kind of what's the first thing that comes to mind? All right. Yep. Community's at the center of all this. Okay, that's good. I want to, and I know we have sometimes different terms for what it is we're doing. So I guess I'm kind of glad, or I get some reinforcement that community is at the center of this. I love to see love, that love and that passion. Both of those things, I find it difficult, make a difference, really important. It's fun, also important. And I'll share part of the conclusion of this. I'll share kind of what slides or what the results were. But it's great to see folks feedback on this, give back to community. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do with today's session, I'm going to go back to the other piece. Let's see. All right, and I should be sharing the presentation again. Is that correct? Excellent.
Yes.
So we'll get into this a little bit later, but I want to share a poem. Sometimes we like to, when I was doing more events in New Mexico, one of the things we like to do is kick off with somebody from the arts community, whether it's a poet, musician, or something like that. And some of you, I'm old school, some of you may find this familiar, some of you may find this completely new, but it's, oh me, oh life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish. What good amid these, oh me, oh life? And the answer, that you are here, that life exists, and identity, and that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. And that's Walt Whitman, sort of abbreviated, adjusted by, let's see, as part of Dead Poet Society, delivered by Robin Williams. And I'm curious, does this resonate with you? I know it does with me. Sometimes I wake up when I'm in whatever different role and I'm wondering, why is it that I'm doing this? Why did I choose to do this thing? And it's kind of like an, oh, woe is me kind of thing. And I'm wondering, am I worthy to do this kind of thing? And I think that's, these days we kind of call that the imposter syndrome, and that's a big thing. But it's been around really for hundreds of years. Uh, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Um, in fact, one of the most common stories, maybe for thousands of years, is something that Joseph Campbell came to call the universal monomyth. It's a story that he found when he looked across all sorts of cultures and across the ages. And what he called it was the hero's journey. And that's something I appreciate that we just talked about heroes a few minutes ago. And I think that the folks that we've got here in the room really are heroes. But one of the things I'd like to talk about today is how to make the most of the heroes that we've got in the room, but also the heroes that you're working with. So we get into the hero's journey. The hero's journey provided the backbone for George Lucas's Star Wars saga and many other movies and stories. And it's my belief that we can use that hero's journey and those kinds of stories for our own work and the communities we serve. So a couple of caveats. Oh, it arrived a little bit late, but I'm not sure if you hear anything. I'll cut that off so we don't have any copyright infringement. I'll try. Here we go. Perfect. All right. So a couple of caveats first. A phrase that I've come to like in this journey that I've been on is that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So what I'm doing recently is playing with how do we take this hero's journey and how do we apply that to the kinds of work that we all have to do as community builders, as organizers, as people who bring folks together. So I'll say that, this is not a complete view. I'm not going to go super in depth. I'm going to talk about a couple of other tools that we use in this. It's an abbreviated version. I'll just leave it at that. So part of that, what we saw is we start with an inciting incident. Wherever you are, you're kind of in the normal world, the ordinary world. Let's see. Uh-oh, something weird's happening.
What if you could remove price as a barrier?
Whoops, sorry about that. You're starting in the ordinary world. There's an inciting incident. Something happens, something new happens, something different happens. And that's called, whoops, I'm moving ahead again. And that's called the call to adventure. Oftentimes what happens is that the hero refuses the call. So Luke doesn't want to leave Tatooine. Rey doesn't want to, she wants to get back to Jakku. Tony Stark, he doesn't want to leave his family. He's got a new family situation and he doesn't want to leave it behind. So oftentimes when we're faced with this call to get involved, to make things happen, the first thing we do is that might be too much for us. Or I've got something that I really know I'm happy with and I want to stay where I am. And getting past that is something that can be really, really important if you want that story to continue. Now, we may not all think that we're heroes. It seems a bit arrogant, and we may not be heroes, but there's some really good news that I think we all have in this room, and that's that unlike many places, we all have we've answered the call. There was a group, there was some entity that said, yes, this is important. We want to move forward with these initiatives. We believe in the power of our place, what makes our place special, and we want to move forward. And you've actually answered that call, whether that's by taking your job or your role or showing up today. By being in this room, you've answered that call. The next phase, though, is the one that really, to me, is, I think, the most important part of this journey, or it's the most crucial part of this journey. It's not necessarily where all the glory is, But it's where we meet and work with our mentors and allies and get to a place where we can work together in a meaningful way and in a way that we can replicate. And I believe we've pretty much all done this. A lot of us did this with COVID. We were presented with something new. We needed to maybe build new allies, build new partnerships in order to address that. So getting this right can be the difference between a successful movie. If you don't get this right, the movie doesn't happen. If you don't get this right, maybe the community or the program or whatever is forgotten about. So it's really, really important. So I want to spend a little bit more of time on this. But first, I wanted to share a little bit more about myself. And my background is a little bit weird. I wouldn't be surprised if many of us in the room have what we might call weird backgrounds. Like we didn't go into this thinking I'm going to be all in on economic development, or I'm a community organizer. Whatever it is, there was something that, helped you feel that call. But for me, I was an Army officer. So thinking about strategy and stuff like that, I ran a radio station in college. Working with a lot of different kinds of folks. I've written plays and poetry, and I also love tech. So part of the through line that I found going through all this is that it's been that I like to develop and work on implementing strategies that bring people together, especially folks who haven't always been included. So at UNM, and the thing that kind of brought me into what I learned was the economic development role, is that I was leading the community building efforts when New Mexico first decided that it wanted to become a production hub for film and media. So what I did not realize when I took that role on, when I answered that call, it's like, okay, we need to do this. Here are a few things I think are going to work. Is that our work was really an accelerator for bringing groups together and moving them forward. Game developers, post-production folks, startup type people, bringing all those kinds of groups together I didn't think of it as an experiment at the time. I think things may have gone better if I had. But I found that some groups, they failed quickly. Some events and activities, we'd run maybe successfully a few times and then maybe that might drop off. But I'm also, kind of heartened to see that some of the work that we did it still lives on today. There are still groups, there are still connections that were made as part of all that have contributed to kind of this next phase where, man, the state is just doing fantastically well related to film and media. It's been a big success. So I've also seen as part of that sometimes, and I've worked with different roles in kind of economic development as part of maybe statewide strategy sessions, but I see sometimes that these larger plans that are developed, sometimes they don't work if the community hasn't been involved, meaning that they don't necessarily have the support that they need, or that buy-in is a little bit missing, so they might start off strong, but they can kind of fade away if the community hasn't owned it, hasn't really felt like this belongs to us. So what I came to realize is that the traction that you have with whatever that core team is, whether it's a council, advisory board, whatever that group is that's close to you, the traction you have with that group and them all being committed to the same goals and to building trust and capacity to work together, that's really essential to your long-term success. So some Marvel spoilers. in Infinity War. Infinity War, for those of you who don't know, the Avengers fail. And I'm sorry if if folks haven't seen it, it's been a while. But one of the reasons for that is that they're scattered all over the place. A lot of them kind of work together in one location, but a lot of it is individual work. This person tries to do this person tries to do that, and they're not all in sync. So luckily they get a do-over in Endgame. And one of the big themes I find in Endgame is that it really talks about team. Those teams are working really, really closely together to do all the things they need to do in order to bring everyone back and then also defeat Thanos. I get chills when everybody shows up in that. So in working with groups that are volunteering their time, and so as an Army officer, I could tell people to do stuff and they were required by law to do it. That may not be the case if you're in your community and you've got a group. Who knows how much time they've got? You know, do they have a couple hours a week? You know, maybe they've got more. But being sensitive to kind of the capacity they have to contribute, the more that I think about that, the more that I've seen this in more recent roles, is I've come to value forms of what's called, let's see, and I may be behind a little bit here, what's called solution-focused facilitation. And part of that world is also, I'd also consider something called asset-based community development, which has got some similar pieces in strategic doing, which I'll get into as well in a second. But the starting point for these processes is that the people, the assets, and the resources that you most need, put it that way, are already in the room. They're already in the community. So you've got what you need in order to grow. And it's important that that's the starting point, that you're building on the strengths and values that give your place, your community, its character. So strategic doing, I'm going to get into a little bit on that a little more. Let's see. Because what I've seen is that it offers a really good balance of the sufficient structure, minimum viable structure, to make things happen, but not to do so in a way that that scares people off, but to give these kind of small victories, common tasks and small victories, as well as breaking down tasks in that volunteers can do in a manageable way. Locally or in New Mexico, I know NMSU's Arrowhead Centers has been doing quite a bit of work around this, around the state. Also, my former organization, Forward Cities, that's kind of one of the key components to the work that Forward Cities is doing as part of ESHIP Rio Grande. And a couple of the reasons why I like this is it's very bite-sized and iterative. So you start with, what are the things that the folks in the room can commit to? Not that, you know, we're going to call somebody else, or I think I can get this person to do something. We're asking people who are sitting around the table to commit to doing a few things, and using those as really these bite-sized mini. It's sort of based on, or to me, it seems very similar to the agile process. We're using these little iterations in order to help move projects forward, as opposed to kind of more formal, you know, a little bit more traditional management or strategic process. So just this is one way Ed Morrison and Strategic Doing Group have kind of looked at how have we worked on management of these kind of strategic planning processes. And what this really gets to is it works with kind of the way that folks work now, where there's not necessarily a formal hierarchy, but it's more of a network of people that's working together to achieve what we want. But let's see. So once you've done the smaller tasks, you have the trust and capacity to do those bigger things. And maybe that's not defeating the Death Star, or other forces of oppression, but it's the work you do in achieving these small victories, these minimum viable success is, let's see, you're creating stories together. And that's the thing that I want to get back to. You're creating stories together that aren't just about one hero. They're about the group really acting as the hero. And you're providing a common narrative so that the community as a whole is the hero of your story. And that's where we get to, you know, as we get into the final phases of your hero's journey or of your community journey, is you've killed the dragon, you've defeated Thanos, or the Emperor, and you've robbed the casino. I'm curious what stories people, you know, what stories or movies might resonate with other folks. You've taken on whatever challenge you've taken on, and that gives you the opportunity to come back to the community, to come back to your team, and you've proven that you can do something, so that you're now able to take on that next, whatever that next big challenge is that you need to do. and that you can begin on your next challenge. You can take on the next challenge together with your community. So what I wanted to share with you all is that we can be heroes. And part of that heroism, I don't want to be arrogant, but one of the things that I think is heroic in the roles that we've taken on is that we're not necessarily trying to be in front and in charge of everything. We're the force behind the scene that lifts up the other key people in our communities and the community as a whole to say, this is the example that we want to follow. And this is something that we can learn from as we move forward and take on the larger tech. Actually, I'm a little faster than I thought it was. So I am glad to, I wanted to return to this. I love this, getting back to the poem that I shared at the very beginning. I think, and this is something that was added by the screenwriter there, but it's that powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be? And that's really what we're asking of you and what we're asking of your community. What is it that your community wants to be known for, so that we can not only build that community, but that others can learn from the story, from the journey that your community has made. So that's my piece for today.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. I'll open it up to questions from the audience. Anyone have questions for Eric? I have one, but I'll let anybody who wants to go first. So Eric, I want to start out with a question for you while we wait on anybody who wants to jump in via the chat space. The Main Street organizations are, for the most part, they're staffed by one or two heroes, right, in a space, and their team exists of people on the board and the community and so on. And I think across the state you see this variation, this difference of periods of high performance by the team as a whole, and then sort of a retraction. Maybe sometimes the directors and the staff take a bigger load for a while as that team kind of rebuilds. And I guess just maybe if you willing to share from your experience with the ESHIP communities and forward cities, any examples of what were the elements of how they rebuild their teams or restocked and replenish their work, as they're moving forward. What are some good examples of the traits in different communities or organizations that were exhibited to make some impact in the communities?
Cool. Yeah. So let's see. I think, and I think a lot of times it starts with, how can I put it? I think oftentimes it starts, and I've done this both with forward cities and elsewhere, where you sometimes start with like what we call like the usual suspects, or the people that you kind of know, oh, I need to have this person at the table. And I think I've come to appreciate a more nuanced view of that, because what I've learned over time is that if the kind of the DNA of the group, of the organization, if it doesn't start kind of involving some of the less involved parts of the community, whether it's underserved or just, they haven't been part of that conversation already. If those folks haven't been invited and maybe a special effort made in order to bring them into this conversation, then it never really goes in that direction. So that's one thing that I think I've learned as far as wanting to do better. However, recognizing that, that's something that I've seen communities where we do recognize that after whatever project, and say, all right, the next time we do this, it's very iterative. It's very it's recognizing not really the flaws, but it's recognizing the gaps. So I think there's a little bit of grace to it as well, where if you acknowledge that things weren't perfect or that things can go better, that's that's one of the elements that I think is really key to the person who's the catalyst in the community. So the person who's leading the effort in a lot of ways. to have some grace and say, let's reflect on what worked well and what, what we were able to achieve. And let's reflect maybe on the things that we'd like to do a better job of. So I think, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question directly, but it's building in that, not just opportunity, but building almost in a requirement for that review, so that you can recognize the things that might be priorities and then talk about how you might implement it the next time you're working on a project or whatever. Not sure if that directly answered your question.
Okay. So, and maybe just a follow up to that, because you mentioned it and Mary mentioned it in her presentation this morning about sort of the shift in demographics in this country, in our communities in New Mexico. I think one of the things that I've heard from some of the Main Street teams is that we're not sure sometimes how to reach out to those businesses or those members of the population who for starters speak a different language, much less have a different culture, right? And
Mhm,
so
mhm.
any suggestions, any pointers to the Main Street teams on how to begin that journey?
It's a great question. Let's see. I mean, first of all, this is something I learned. I did. So I started 1 Million Cups. Some people are probably familiar with that. It's a Kaufman generated activity. And when I started that, I I did the wrong thing. I had some of the usual suspects in the room, and not they're all good folks, but I didn't start with as diverse a group as I needed to. So I think one of the steps towards being more inclusive about language is talking with some of the different groups that already have that language in their community. One thing we learned with, say, with as the 1 Million Cups example is, uh, I don't know, good intentions, but intentions aren't necessarily impact. We wanted to have it be a bilingual effort, and we helped start a 1 Million Cups sort of a version of 1 Million Cups, I call it that, that takes place at South Valley Economic Development Center. The good and bad thing is that while our initial idea for the organizers was that these things would move together at some point, that was successful as its own thing. And the folks who were organizing that event wanted to keep it separate. However, um, making sure that there are folks, organizations, allies that are part of your team or even kind of that extended network so that some of the events and activities are, say, bilingual, or are recognizing different access questions that might exist in the community. I think that's just a key piece. It may not be that that's happening all the time. I probably personally suggest that it move that way, but I think it really is about involving those potential allies and partners in reaching folks and making sure that it's accessible as possible. With technology, one of the things I love about Zoom, and we experimented with in a couple of different locations, both Kansas City and Long Beach, is we made translation part of the way that we conducted our meetings, so that it was always available if we needed it. Oftentimes, folks didn't necessarily take up that offer, but knowing that that was a capability and building it in, that we wanted to ensure that that was our baseline of effort, that we had that capability going in, was a really important piece when some of the programs we had were reaching different audiences that frankly weren't always served by more traditional economic development organizations.
And since you mentioned the 1 Million Cups, then maybe I'd just like you to elaborate on that a little bit for those in our rural communities who may not be familiar with it, what it was, what the intent was, and what the impact of that was.
Oh, sure. I am glad to promote 1 Million Cups. So 1 Million Cups it's a weekly event. So I'll tell the story and just won't take too much time with it. But several years ago, about 7, maybe 8, the Kauffman Foundation was looking at. They've always been a very research-driven, data-driven organization, doing a lot of research around support and how entrepreneurship works across the United States. And that's been part of their portfolio, I think, pardon me, since the foundation was started. several years ago, they said they became interested in becoming more, in having more of an impact locally. And as part of that, good entrepreneurs, good researchers, they began bringing in businesses, and just happened to be on a Wednesday morning. They bring them over to their office, and they brought in a couple entrepreneurs, and they basically wanted to hear those entrepreneur stories. Why was it you started your business? How does it work? And what they found is that the entrepreneurs that came in enjoyed this so much, especially hearing the stories of other entrepreneurs, that they wanted to come back as more entrepreneurs were involved. So when this became, maybe a dozen to 20 folks meeting together in a room on Wednesday morning, having a cup of coffee, they began to say, well, this is something that might be scalable. This is something that maybe could work in other places around the country. So they launched it as a pilot. And I'll give it a little bit on structure. The way the structure works now is we typically have one or two presenters share a 6 to 8 minute story of who they are, why they started their business, how does the business operate, how does it actually function, and then is there a challenge or an opportunity that they're pursuing. And rather than a pitch, it's a presentation that gives our audience just enough information about that business so we can have a productive conversation. So it's not necessarily, I call it Q&A sometimes, but it's really the more that we get to a real conversation where folks are, they're in the corner of the entrepreneur and wanting to help them. That's where I think we find the strength in this. And then we get those really valuable conversations that happen in the room, but also as follow-up. Albuquerque became the 50th city to do this. I know there's one in El Paso, and we've talked off and on about something. The original idea was actually something that might be in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. But now that it's all online, we're working with people from around the state, but also having some, let's see, I'm going to put something in the chat. We're working with entrepreneurs from around the country to present, and also always interested in more local entrepreneurs.
So then
So
I have
I
one.
recommend it to everyone, and we get a chance to promote other events and activities that are taking place around the state.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. I have one additional question for you. You showed a couple of slides around the strategy doing and one of the subsequent slides in your presentation showed the strategy development piece versus strategy management. And I think what I see a lot of really creative and innovative work in the local Main Street communities around the strategy development, but sometimes the strategy management part of the equation tends to stall out. And so you have any thoughts or any pointers for the participants here about taking those creative ideas and then moving into action?
That's a good question. And I think, and one thing I hope I didn't, go steer too far away from the importance of how this all connects. One of the things that I think one of the speakers mentioned earlier is kind of this ecosystem building approach to things. And what I've liked about ecosystem building is, to me, the strength of that is it marries the really essential kind of grassroots effort with both strategies and policies that help and support entrepreneurs. Because I think if you've got like a local grassroots effort, you can make some things happen, but sometimes that's stunted if you don't have support of policymakers, whether it's the state or the local level. So that can really give some fire and some energy to those kinds of efforts. Taken from the other perspective, if there's an effort that's done that's only driven by, say, some level of government, that can really achieve some big things sort of short term. But if it hasn't really involved the community in a meaningful way, I find it less likely that that's going to be sustainable. If you get like a nice unicorn company, it makes $1 trillion, that can really jumpstart that community and make it more long-term and sustainable. But if that doesn't happen, and that's really just we can't count on that, put it that way. So that's why I think both of these efforts working together, working in tandem, are really important. And if the policy making and that strategic, uh, the strategy development, if that's informed by and includes the entrepreneurs and the folks who are running key community organizations like Main Street, I think it's just got so much better chance of succeeding in a more meaningful way that the community feels like it owns, so that it can be, so that the community can be proud of itself and that it can be replicated elsewhere.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Eric, we have a question from Melanie in Santa Fe. She says, I remember 1 Million Cups as more pitch focused. Pitch focused. Have they nationally changed the focus to story, or is that something you've done more on your own because it works?
Well, and I'm a big fan of Melanie's and Kick-Ass Entrepreneurs and Entrepreneur Storytime in Santa Fe, but of course, available to everyone. Let's see. The way that I put it is, I think it's a good question. So I have to ponder it for a second. I'm going to take a moment. It wasn't intentionally pitch focused. I think a lot of the terminology that we used when it started. So again, well, I'll say that there are now about maybe 150 cities across the country, and this is my personal view. I'm not sure that I have all the talking points for for 1 Million Cups Down, but one of the focuses was really on high growth startups or high growth companies. Not necessarily they were in startup mode because they need to have a certain number of customers on board, but it really was that high growth aspect. And that, to the extent that we've emphasized, I'll put it that way, to the extent that we've emphasized something different here at our place in New Mexico, is what we say as a team, as an organizing team, is if we have an entrepreneur that may not fit the criteria fully, but we believe strongly that the conversation they'll have with our audience will benefit both our audience and that entrepreneur, that's a conversation we want to have. So we do involve lots and lots of different kinds of businesses, some startups, some high growth that, God bless them, make make $1 billion, but those small businesses, Main Street businesses that are just kind of part of the fabric of the community. So, and to that point, the thing that's in common about how it presents is a pitch becomes transactional. And I know at least a few of the faces I see, a few of the names that I see, we've been part of a lot of pitch competitions. I love a good pitch competition. They're fun, they're exciting. But it's, in some ways, it's almost disposable sometimes. It's just like, you give the vote, or, you give some good feedback and you hope that that business grows. You hope that that business moves forward. But I feel that this presentation, this more conversational, story-based approach, love story time, that more story-based approach really gets, well, like the thing that I was talking about in my earlier presentation. How do we invest in these people as heroes? If someone's just giving a pitch, I might like that and I might like that individual. But if I sort of fall in love with, in a way, with the entrepreneur and their problem and what it is that they're trying to do, that's an investment I'm making kind of with my heart and my soul and what I have invested in the community. And that really, I think, builds a stronger bond. So I've been babbling for a while. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Eric. And we have a question from Christina. Says, wonder if Eric wants to talk about ESHIP. There's good contrast there.
Let's see. Oh, thank you, Christina. Good to see you out there. Let's see. So, well, just like community and innovation, and now sort of ESHIP can be a couple different terms. So I'll try and help define that. One of the things that I'm not sure if you've all experienced, but some conversations that I have about entrepreneurship, people don't like the term entrepreneur. It sounds fancy. And, New Mexico is sort of famously humble in some ways, humble to a fault. I'll say that. So putting on airs with fancy words, French words like entrepreneur, sometimes doesn't feel right. And when I talk to people, it's like I have a business or I have a side gig or hustle. I've got some different term for this. So one of the things that, and this is my belief, my personal opinion is that in order to make that term entrepreneurship a little more accessible, they kind of shortened it and made it, not so many syllables. I can't always say it, depends on how many cups of coffee I've had. But talk about program of ESHIP. So ESHIP was, or is, the Kaufman Foundation recognized that, let's see, hopefully don't make this too long, but they recognize that entrepreneurship across the country, the level of entrepreneurship has really been in decline over many years. And looking at national competitiveness and looking at just really how do we have a United States of America that plays to its strengths throughout the country versus a handful of places that have a lot of investment. They recognize that they needed to do more, or felt that they needed to do more about encouraging entrepreneurship, speaking about that broadly across the country. So what they came up with was a way to encourage the people who were already doing this sort of community building work, ecosystem development work, to bring those kinds of folks together to learn their lessons and find some common themes in that work in order to, continue to develop those themes so that they could be shared more broadly with other folks around the country. What Forward Cities part of their role was to say, we believe these things are true. How can we test these in a variety of communities around the country? So what's in working with the Kaufman Foundation, identified 4 different locations across the US to run in a way sort of, it's not just the experiment, but how can we help be a catalyst for community building and ecosystem building in these different locations? And 4 communities were Kaufman Foundation's based in Kansas City. They always work in the Kansas City area, so that community began first, but also working with Baltimore, city of Long Beach, and in New Mexico, there was a different approach where, because the group of the kind of the first set of people who were in the room, we saw some real strength and opportunity in the food and agriculture sector. Because we saw that, we chose to do a little bit more of a regional approach. So it's a little bit more of a systems approach. And what's been going on with that right now is each community has its own sort of a community council that works together, much using tools like strategic doing, other facilitation tools, ways of assessing what's going on in the community, and then bringing that back and applying it to how do we continue to grow those communities. So each community has different strengths and different needs. Most of this has a very much of an equity lens in terms of who folks are getting involved and what the programs are. And I'd say it's the experiment is sort of almost getting to the midpoint. So those results and all that kind of stuff will be shared probably a little bit more like a year down the road. But I think we already learned quite a few things about how to make those councils more effective, and how to build those teams as teams so that they are continuing to grow and build each other's strengths and really build the trust among the folks who are working together so that, in the next iteration, folks are like, yeah, I saw, so my colleague in New Mexico, Erin Ortigoza, she put together this great sort of mini conference symposium with folks like Christina and others around the food value chain here in New Mexico. I think what we heard was a lot of people were hungry for that kind of event and activity. And that's kind of that's, I'm not sure if that's defeating Thanos or killing a dragon, but it was a real like, oh, good. This group, small group, mostly volunteers, had the ability to come together, make something powerful and important happen that added value to the ecosystem. Now that a lot of other people have seen this, there's an opportunity to do even more. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Christina, but that's one project kind of in the ESHIP community. Some are smaller, like community hubs have been created, outreach, mentorship programs, a lot of good smallish projects in different locations around the country that ideally will be, could be replicated elsewhere.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the audience? It doesn't look like it. So why don't we take a short break early before we start the 2 o'clock presentation? I just want to say thank you, Eric, for joining us today. Definitely appreciate your insights and the information you presented today. We're honored to have you present to the Main Street community. So thank you so much for your time. And we hope you stay for the rest of the session and join us again next week. So how about we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back with Michelle Negretti and Robin Beaubien to give the final presentation this afternoon.